Fond memories.
Fond memories indeed. I'm going to look back over them.
What was the BBC cartoon? Was it in the 70s with the seamen? I won't use the second word.
But it's not. That's a fallacy. You mean
Captain Pugwash?
That's a fallacy. Never happened.
Oh, it never happened.
Never happened.
Okay.
It was one of those urban myths. If only it had been. There was that and Magic Roundabout as well, I think, which used to get calls for.
Well, there was something strange about.
Well, there was something strange.
He's got his sugar lumps, Dylan's got his carrot and all that. It's quite interesting. And then you've got Wizzy bouncing up and down. It's quite interesting.
I think of you sometimes. I'm only joking. Listen, welcome. It's very good to see you both. There's obviously some very serious issues we want to deal with. Before we get into that, just what scared you as a child on TV in movies?
I was quite growing up when that was very interesting. That caller saying E.T. was frightening. That was quite amazing.
Grace.
What scared me was a adults program. I was up late at night, and it's basically a painting, and the painting came real and stood out of it. For some reason, that triggered something in me, and for the rest of the next 5 years, I thought that painting was the character was going to come out of my cupboard. It's strange what frightens you as a kid. Certain things just trigger something in you.
Actually, it only just came to me now. And I thought I couldn't think of anything. Not The Prisoner. I enjoyed The Prisoner. I think it came out. I was about 8 years old. But the finale, the final of The Prisoner, when he escapes.
Never saw the finale.
It had something to do with ritual war. It was something at the final. It was,
he doesn't get away, does he?
I've never seen the end of The Prisoner.
No.
He was moving
The
like
Fugitive, which annoyed me. Still, as in not the movie, but the one that went on every Sunday.
I remember having bad dreams that night, and because there was like 1A and 1B, and you were trying to get to number 1, and then there was something to do with nuclear holocaust, because obviously that was probably the big issue at the time. I can't remember exactly how it ended, but I remember having bad dreams. But otherwise, I thought The Prisoner, remember the guys, the cameras, and they were going round and round, and
it's fantastic.
Number 2, you are number 6. I am not a number. I'm a free man. Good capitalist.
I Doctor Who, I mean, you're about the same age as me. Doctor Who, I thought was quite frightening. When black and white days. I remember me behind the sofa, watching it through fingers,
And looking back now,
what was I frightened of? It was just like a bit of cardboard.
I remember being protected from something that obviously was violent and incredibly scary for somebody young, Dr. Zhivago. I remember as a family we were watching Dr. Zhivago. They were watching it. I remember being very young. I remember being every so often a hand would come over my eyes and my ears and be blocked off. They're really gory. And I don't think I've ever seen it in full since then, to be honest, because you get that assumption, that link that actually this is something I don't really want to see.
Or you had clips of Dr. Zhivago where suddenly the channel changes.
It changes over. I didn't realise there was that in the middle of it. Mel has asked me to advise you all that I do not recall Hammer House of Horrors. If you also cannot recall Hammer House of Horrors, or are absolutely appalled and shocked and surprised that I cannot, then let us know. Do you recall Hammer House of Horrors?
Oh yeah, of course.
That's because you spoke to it.
I don't think I ever watched it, but I know of it.
I remember it very well. Yeah. That was kind of pretty frightening, but then it was sort of naff as well,
As always, you can comment on anything you hear in the hour that our two guests are with us. 0207 224 2000, Jamie Kelsey Fry and Charlie Wolfe. Charlie, let's start with you. And obviously one of the main stories we've been talking about on the programme tonight is religion, and particularly one of the aspects of that is the events in Israel earlier today.
Yeah, this is this murder, this terrorist attack that took place in Jerusalem, where 2 Palestinians armed with, guns, a knife, a meat cleaver, and an axe, which is almost somewhat reminiscent of the event that happened in New York about 3 weeks ago. Remember when this guy with an axe attacked two policemen? We have to see this for what it is. It is an act of terrorism. It's not an isolated event. It's not a lone wolf event. These people have been motivated to do this. It has, I think, nothing to do with the usual excuses of an oppressed people or the right to resistance, etc. I don't see, attacking someone at prayer is a form of resistance. I don't know what you're resisting against.
This is about Temple Mount, isn't it?
Yeah, this is about Temple Mount. It's obviously a complicated situation, and that's fair to say. But I think we can sometimes, we're so looking for answers that sometimes we don't want to admit the realities. And we start getting into things like moral relativisms. I just found today a piece from Baroness Worsey, who I think is a smart lady, but
former cabinet minister,
conservative peer. But in some respects, again, since the whole thing over the summer with the conflict in Gaza, for lack of a better term, I almost feel there's a bit of Kool-Aid being drunk. And forgive me, because I think I could probably come up with a better term, but it's a little bit late at night. Reading this thing, should never forget, in Israel and Palestine, violence breeds violence. And it gets into that mentality of a tit-for-tat cycle of violence, and I don't think that's anything to do with it. I don't see where the cycle is. You don't go and murder people at prayer.
But then the argument would also... Sorry, 1 second, and then get you in. The other argument that others have made that I've heard today is that the Israel causing the deaths of 500 children during the summer conflict that we talk about.
2,000 civilians.
And including that number.
Is that an act of terrorism, though, what happened in Gaza when 2,000 people were killed, 500 children?
No, the reason it's not. It's obviously not a savory situation, to say the very least. It's a tragic situation, to say the very least. But again, you're comparing a military that is under a command structure that is answerable to an elected government to a terrorist group that's doing whatever they want. The military has rules of engagement. If they get it wrong, there is boards of inquiry. You're not going to find that with terror. You're not going to see Israeli soldiers or British soldiers or American soldiers attacking people at prayer, because there's no need to. It doesn't fit in with a mission. So I think we make a big mistake. Again, it's unsavory, and it's not to say that troops, armies don't make mistakes, but when we start comparing ourselves with acts of terrorism, I think we fall into a bit of a black hole. It's a bad place to be.
But 2,000 civilians and 500 children, that's a lot of mistakes, isn't it?
Well, no, but those you also, again, and I don't want to necessarily relitigate the summer event because obviously it's been litigated quite extensively. There's more, as we were saying, talking before the show. You need to take a wider look at things.
Yeah.
And the situation there was you had a government in Hamas putting their people at risk. Mm-hmm. There were many instances of soldiers. Of pilots, for instance, on bombing runs, pulling out at the last minute. But there were also times where buildings were supposedly cleared out, and then Hamas was sending people in as bombing runs were happening. Well, that's what
Regev was claiming the whole time, but I mean, I'm not convinced about that. Either way, to be honest. I think a lot of claims were being made by Regev during that period of where 2,000 people were being murdered in front of our eyes, and he was making a lot of claims along those lines, but there was no evidence of that. But then there's no evidence.
Well,
there's a lot, as you implied, a very important part is it's a lot more complex, the story. But I see it, my own personal experience of it is going out there in the 80s myself and going to Nablus and spending a week in Nablus and just seeing how the Palestinian people were being treated by the Israeli military. In my naive head, I thought it was probably one of the most disgraceful things happening in my planet. And it was my epiphany moment, to be honest. Because I thought, if that's, I'm a middle-class kid from Bromley, and this is happening over here and nothing's happening about it.
But again, you have to ask, have to ask the reason why. And again, it's because of security concerns. And,
but now shooting at kids, Charlie, I don't know if that doesn't wash with me, security concerns.
It's interesting. I was chatting to my older brother, who's, former Air Force guy in the States, more or less to get out of Vietnam at the time. And we were chatting about the incident about the guys on the beach. And again, he, the first comment he had, he said, "What parents would let their kids go into a war zone?" So there's a lot of shades of this that people don't necessarily see. And again, I'm not saying that the Israelis are totally, free of culpability, but you have to look at Lincoln once talked about in the Civil War. He said, "Sure, there are arguments that the South had that were right, but there's a preponderance of right on a certain side." And again, I still see a democracy dealing with acts of terror. I mean, what would we do if this was happening here?
Well, we mentioned this earlier on, and we may debate that in a second. I'm guessing what we would do here is we would, in a sense, similarly as we have done, bring those two people who carried it out to court and see if they were found guilty or not guilty. If they were found guilty, serve a sentence, as we saw in the events in Woolwich.
But again, in this situation, there was a security risk, and they were, they had to be dealt with on the scene, which could have happened here as well, to be fair.
Indeed, it could have done, and it may well have nearly happened at that scene too. Jamie, what should the Israeli response be, if anything?
Well, it's always a very contentious thing to be talking about, and we're very interested to see what people are going to say when they phone in. But the response, please, cannot be going back and murdering 2,000 people and 500 children. Please.
What should it be?
Well, people will very easily roll out the two-state solution, and I think you're looking at a real loggerheads situation, and a lot of kind of over the years, lots of kind of powerful kind of Western government figures have kind of gone over and try to kind of find peace, but there's such a resolution on both sides not to find peace.
So what do they do in this
I think
situation?
one better solution would be this, though, is that our mainstream media need to be really representing both sides much more clearly. You know, this is a huge story, and it's a horrific thing to murder people, particularly when they're praying. But I think that the mainstream media don't seem to be balanced enough in what the key arguments are from both sides. You know, there's a lot that would suggest that, you know, it's unjustifiable to be going to Gaza and murdering 2,000 people and 500 children, and that should be highlighted. I want to see.
But I mean,
Just before you come back.
Yeah.
So as a result of this, do the government say words that is, we absolutely find this abhorrent, full stop? Do they make threats? Do they actually do something that is in retaliation? What should they do?
Words, well, that's what they're doing at the moment, and it is horrific. But to actually retaliate by going and murdering civilians,
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But what should they do?
To condemn it and say, look, you know, to honestly say to the world, you who kind of condemn Israel for what we do in Gaza, you have to realise this is what we have happening. Okay?
Can I just one point? Just to call you up on one thing, the way you phrase that of going out and murdering 2,000 people and 500 children almost makes it sound like at the beginning when
that was the intention,
when the three were kidnapped, it was like the military sat down and said, well, let's go and murder, which it wasn't. What they said was, we have a situation where rockets are coming in that need to be disposed of. There's terrorist cell. Then they found out, which they didn't know, but they found out about this tunnel or network of tunnels that were going to kidnap people. So you talked to a Richard Kemp, who worked in the British military, very respected, said, you know, it was proportional because it's proportionality to the mission. I think,
I don't think it's the proportionality thing. I just think it's illegal.
Yeah.
I think
again,
there's a lot of illegal settlers there as well, though, aren't there?
Well, and again, that's a whole other topic which we could be here till the end of the show.
I'll tell you what I would like actually. I've just thought about it. You know, we often look to our leaders. What's the right response? No, we should be doing something about it. To be honest, I mean, as just human beings from anywhere on the planet, we should be doing something about it. You know, our leaders are absolutely incapable of reacting in any useful way.
But of course, interesting, a majority of individuals on both sides of that conflict want peace.
Yeah.
And it is leaders across the world
the leadership that's failing is not necessarily Netanyahu, who always gets talked about, but it is Hamas. And the Arabs have never served the Palestinians well. And this was the line I took basically over the summer, was, I'd say, listen, yeah, it's horrible that 2,000 people are getting killed in this sort of situation. But again, why is it happening? Because you have Hamas putting missiles, which is a violation of
in hospitals, isn't it?
Yeah, in hospitals.
Yeah, but I don't know. There's no evidence of that.
There was total. I mean, you could see from the secondary explosions, etc., in the tunnels, the pictures of the tunnels, and Hamas admitted to a lot of it after the event. So until they're better served.
When Jon Snow spoke about this, and when he famously put the black tape over his mouth.
Yeah,
he wasn't convinced that was the case at all.
Yeah, but
to
be fair, I think Jon Snow did a disservice to journalism. I saw that interview with Mark Regev. I can't remember now, or the video he did where he crossed the line. He's supposed to be above all of that and be a journalist, and he was becoming an advocate, which I think wasn't his place. And to me, and I know there's a lot of people that respect Jon Snow, and he's a great journalist, but I think at that moment he failed in his calling, because he got too close to the story and became an advocate and a commentator and not describing the facts on the ground, which I thought was a shame for him.
One of the other things we were talking about, which some brought this in, some didn't, was this article in the Huffington Post about whether religion really does cause war. Whilst we're on the subject, what do you both make of that?
You want to go first, or?
Sure. Well, it does, obviously. But then I think religion is... obviously some people will find this offensive, but I think religion is just a sign of a civilization that's still trying to develop. I think that religion is a way for us to sort of abdicate our responsibility as human beings to a god or some figure, where in fact I think we'll grow up one day, this species, and religion will no longer actually have any use whatsoever. It's all invented, in my opinion. There's absolutely no god, but the fact is that what that does is stop you actually being a human being and taking responsibility for yourself. I've studied religion in depth, and so often across the world when you work with religious people, they are almost like, it'll be all right because I'm going to go to heaven. No, you're not. There's no heaven, there's no hell, it's now. And you should act in a goodly way, not because it's in your book, but it's because it's in you, it's in your genes, Until recently, there weren't religions in the way that we know them. This male religion thing is very, very new. For millions and millions of years, until the last couple of minutes, it was matriarchal societies, like globally, and matriarchal religions. They were very, very different. Their whole attitude is not like abdicate your responsibility, be good, go to heaven. It was all about care for each other, care for your planet, care for your children. A matriarchal sensibility and a sort of matriarchal religion. Totally different things.
Jamie's looking to move to the island of Lesbos.
Aren't we all?
No, I have to disagree. I think if you look at the systems where there's been major death and major murder, you look at the Nazis, which were atheists. You look at the communists. Sometimes religion.
Look at the capitalists; they're religious, aren't they? They're causing more death.
Actually, funny enough, Ayn Rand I wouldn't say I'm an objectivist, but as someone who's a fan of objectivism, they're strictly atheist. Ayn Rand was an atheist.
George Bush said, "God told me to do it." I think Tony Blair was telling us that God was telling him to do stuff.
Actually, here's an interesting thing. Only because I was just thinking this a second ago. I wasn't going to mention it, but since you bring up George Bush, a lot of people thought, well, George Bush hates gays because he's Christian and Christians hate gays. The most successful program that's ever been done by the United States was the PEPFAR program, which was to fight AIDS in Africa. And that was done by George Bush. And the motivating factor, and he's on record of this, is he says, as a Christian, I had a deep care for fellow human beings who were dying of a horrible disease, and that was the motivating factor.
In lots of other ways, he didn't act as if he had much care about other human beings.
No, listen.
A lot of people say he's a war criminal.
No, I disagree. And I think,
a lot of people say Tony Blair's a war criminal.
Well,
one of them.
I think that's just a bit over the top. But even that, there were a couple of people. I was listening in the studio. We were listening, to your prior hour, and I know there were several callers that were going on and saying, Jesus talked about turning the other cheek, etc., which is true. But that is the responsibility of us as individuals. I'm not going to hate someone because they're a Palestinian.
That's what I'm saying. You don't need a religion to take to do that.
I'm just going to make you have...
But a government's responsibility is different.
Wonderful. In that sentence there, it would be remiss of me not to suggest that what you're referring to regarding AIDS and HIV and linking it purely to homosexuality would be wrong.
Absolutely.
Of course. But that was, when he did the PEPFAR program, that was his motivating factor, was his religion. And a lot of people ascribe to religion this hatred of people who are gay.
All right, hold that thought. 11:30 is the time. Simon Lederman Show, on BBC London 94.9. And we'll be back after the headlines from Valley Fontaine.
Thanks, Simon. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has urged people not to take the law into their own hands after 5 Jewish men.
Lots of reaction coming through about Paddington Bear and the reasons why perhaps it's been given a PG certificate rather than a U. We're also asking about what the kind of things that scared you when you were younger based on movies and TV shows. Faye says, Simon, I remember being babysat by my youngish uncle and we watched Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Gosh, what a start in your life. I was scared witless back in the late 60s. Obviously, we're scared of the monsters in the Doctor Who programmes too, when Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee were him. Paul says, some of the first scene I ever remember being totally scared witless at was a child catcher scene from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. The famous dancer Sir Robert Helpman was superb in that role. Yeah. I suppose after the Paddington Farrago, if Chitty was shown today, it would probably receive a 15 or an 18 certificate from the BBC. Actually, that's very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that would definitely
totally not allowed now, I would imagine.
Actually, it was amazing. Speaking on the same lines,
Yeah.
I was on the BBC's site. On the iPlayer,
foolhardy place.
On the iPlayer.
Wild guy.
And but it was something about space, and it linked me to this archive. And there was the panorama from, I think, the day the LEM had taken off from the moon with Buzz Aldrin and what's his face, Neil Armstrong. And there was Robin Day with his bow tie
intact, yeah.
And he said, and we'll be talking about the implications of yada yada yada. We have the economist, Dr. Professor Sigmund Susov, and all these big Englishy names. And he said, and we have space expert Joe Bloggs, and the camera cuts to Joe Bloggs, who's sitting there, and obviously
big pipe
with a big pipe in his mouth, puffing away.
I remember that. I remember that.
And with that sort of look, with that, that very, I'm in academia, I'm upper class,
and you are not.
And and at one point it was, Robin says, now let's go, we have the satellite, let's go to Florida and we'll go to our correspondent. Oh, wait a minute. And there's a red phone sitting on the desk. He picks up the phone and he's talking to the folks up in the control room. Oh, I fear we don't have the satellite now. And he puts the phone down and says, let's instead go to... And there's guys smoking pipes and wearing bow ties.
Television, very different in those days. Paul says there's nothing wrong with a child being scared watching a movie or reading a novel. After all, the Roald Dahl books, which I read to my kids, were a whole lot of fun, and the occasional nightmare isn't a disaster, especially if you have loving parents at home.
Oh, that's a fantastic message. Yeah, no,
Lizzie says, Catweasel used to scare me, Sid. I can't remember why, but I don't even remember what this show was about now, says Lizzie. Scott says, Simon, I still have the copy of Paddington Helps Out, which I won for class citizenship in 4th class in 1971. I'm really looking forward to seeing the movie. At first I thought I might be one of the few adults who want to see it, but in hindsight realised there'll be many my age who will reminisce. When I was a kid, it was commonplace to see lots of extreme violence on cartoons, but it was never resulting in me being violent. To the contrary, I'd say PG isn't being too cautious, simply because it will allow virtually anybody to experience the joy of the bear from Lima. Best wishes, Scott in Kennington. And Sandy says, looking forward to seeing Paddington. Love the promos, love the bears. Thank you, Sandy. And we didn't even say who was in it from this station. Do either of you know who on this station presenters has a starring role? I say starring, he's in it. It's a he. He's in it for and then he's gone.
Robert Helms.
He's in it. Good call, not Robert, because he's also dressed up in the same uniform before. One more guess.
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Eddie Nestor.
Eddie,
oh yeah, of course.
Eddie Nestor.
Is he really?
He is indeed, and in fact, he's wearing the same uniform that Robert once wore. Not exactly the same, but I think they're both purporting to work for the Tube. Anyway, if you get a chance to see it, watch out. You'll have to don't blink during the whole movie, or you'll miss Eddie.
Can I just say though, I'm a bit amazed. It shows where life is heading. When you started this hour or this half hour, and you said, the phones have been lighting up with this major reaction, and I was thinking, we just had a half hour we were discussing murder in Israel and war and peace and PEPFAR program in Africa and so forth, and I'm expecting you to say our guests have lit up the phones with reaction, and you mentioned Paddington Bear.
Of course, this is what
Paddington Bear, and I felt so let down.
Well, there's still half an hour to change it. Make Charlie's night. That's not an offer I usually offer you. 0207 224 2000 is our number. Charlie Wolfe and Jamie Kelsey Fry here to review the day. Jamie is contributing editor for New Internationalist magazine. Charlie is a presenter, a political commentator, and a writer. Jamie, tell us the problems of being under 30.
There's this really well written article actually by Alex Proud, and it's if you're under 30, bad luck. And it's basically, there's never been a worse time to be young, and British, thanks to the selfishness of the baby boomers and the political indifference of today's 20-somethings. So it's talking about, imagine being young folks in London, and you're not going to have any chance of getting onto the property ladder whatsoever. There's one bit in the article where he says, you were in your 40s before you saved enough to buy a dump in Catford, and even then it's likely that you'll be
the people of Catford.
And even then Catford's beautiful, and even then it's likely that you'll be outbid by a buy-to-let investor, or increasingly and tragically refuse the mortgage because then you're too old.
The oligarchs will be buying into Catford before you know it.
Well, he talks a lot about that side of it as well. This sort of unfair situation whereby very very rich people from abroad are buying all our big properties up. But also he talks quite a lot about Russell Brand, and of course Russell Brand is a very interesting character. I think, of course,
to some, yeah.
Oh well, whether you support him or don't, he's stirred things up, and good on him. There's a brilliant point that's made in here.
But so has Nigel Farage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're both a right little pair of stirrers, those two.
Yeah.
But there's a lovely little point in here that he makes, right? Because people are really knocking Russell the whole time, and this guy points out the fact that Russell Brand has more Twitter followers than the Washington Post and the Financial Times combined, which I think is really important.
So probably has Kim Kardashian.
Yeah.
Samantha Fox or whoever the character.
It's not necessarily the movers and shakers of the problem. It's the
but Kim Kardashian's not talking about the kind of stuff that Russell's
isn't
talking
the issue
about,
that not enough people follow the New York Times? Isn't that the problem?
Well, yeah. Well, yeah. Or it's an indicator of the fact that he is speaking in a way that reaches people much more than
but
those kind of papers
there have
do.
been many that have an ability to touch a nerve to stir things up, to relate to people, but may not offer solutions, which I think also the author here says he doesn't necessarily offer any
the author's not particularly a fan of Russell. But then that kind of criticism was thrown at Occupy. And I was very much involved in Occupy.
Yeah.
And I'd say, to be honest, if Occupy was a political party, then we're in with a chance. But, they wouldn't
but isn't that the point? Why isn't Occupy a political party?
Well,
for the same reason that Russell Brand often is heard, I'm not here to have power, I don't want you to vote, I'm just here as a conduit for other people's views. And I wonder what you make of what Charlie was saying about what Russell Brand, solutions-wise, has to offer.
It's very Occupy. I know Russell, and we've spoken about this before, right? He is very Occupy, and brilliantly so. But solutions would be, for example, you have to start having a situation whereby corporations aren't dictating to governments how they're going to be running the world. You have to have a situation where corporations can be accountable. There's a charter. Corporations are given charters, and if they act illegally, they lose their charter. That hasn't happened in 50 years, despite the fact that every year they are found guilty of horrific crimes and just fined. But I mean, it's an economic calculation for a corporation. Let's break this law. If we get caught, we'll get fined 24 million. If we don't, we'll make 50 billion. Yeah, fair deals. Okay. And you've got people from another thing that Russell would talk about, because he's an occupier, is the revolving door between government and corporations. I mean, it's just blatant. It's in your face. And luckily,
are you telling me that people from the HMRC leave one day and the next day go and work for Deloitte?
We know that's happening, and vice versa. And luckily, because of people like Russell Brand, because of people like Occupy, and because of the hero of the revolution, who is Tim Berners-Lee, because he invented the web, and that's what's making everything possible for us, is now more and more people are realising this is a dreadful stitch-up. And it doesn't matter who you vote for, the same ridiculous neoliberal rubbish is going to get in. So that's why Occupy doesn't have a political party. What Occupy has is they're trying to be a platform to generate people to discuss better forms of democracy.
But how do you get the change that you want?
There's no structure
to filling the streets, absolutely filling the streets.
But again, there's no structure to Occupy.
Well, you've got to come down and tell us that, Charlie, because there is.
I mean, from what I saw over the couple summers ago, it just didn't impress me. There was no solutions being offered. I mean, some of the things.
I bet you weren't. I was there every day, right? So within 48 hours, 3,500 people took part using participatory democracy in creating the first initial statement. So we had a revolving thing that was called a People's Assembly. So that's called direct democracy. Everyone took part. 3,500 people took part. So within 48 hours, we had 9-point statement. So within 48 hours, we were saying why we were there.
But again,
hold on. Then a week later, we released our corporations statement. The week after that, we released our City of London corporation statement. We released 5 statements. We were very clear while we were there. People, obviously that wasn't put out as the mainstream media that much, because we were making quite a lot of sense, because we were saying things like, sophisticated loopholes for tax avoidance is not a good thing. We were saying a lot of things. Actually, now people are slowly going, you've got a point, you're not going to get that from a government.
But no, the way to change that, though, is then you run for government.
No, you don't.
This is why we have governments. And, if you want to change the system, either you get involved in government. I mean, some of the points you made, I think, are definitely worth looking at about, again, going from government to corporations, etc. I can understand, the arguments there, but at the same time, I think I want to be careful that we're not telling the free market how to run itself. Corporations are just groups of people that have formed a business, and they do business voluntarily with the public. No one forces me to buy a hamburger from a certain burger chain.
Yeah, but they also create the regulations, they create their loopholes, they fund campaigns.
So out of interest, and there will be people, as Charlie says, that will find what you say very interesting and actually will say, what you stand for, we would like to see that change. But is that change pointless if you don't have a government to deliver it? Because a government is the proof of democracy. You may not like the choices you have on offer, but if you don't offer the additional choice, then a minority of people who fill the streets, as you say, does not speak for the country and cannot be voted electorally democratically. So how do we prove that what you stand for is what the majority wish to see?
That's exactly the crux of where a group like Occupy is at the moment. I mean,
isn't there an easy solution? Because you said if Occupy were a political party, we'd be in with a chance.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, but they're not at that stage. And also, it's important that Occupy, in a way, unless people get involved in it, they kind of think, oh, Occupy's that thing over there that people are doing. No, Occupy is you. It's a platform. That's all. There's no one leading it. So what's interesting about Occupy, like Occupy Democracy will be taking Parliament Square again on Friday, 6:30, and they're going to be doing it for the next every 2 weeks.
That's not democratic, is it?
No, but it's not. Hold on.
That's mob rule.
It's not. Mob rule, man.
Charlie,
you don't know what you're talking about, because when it happened the last time, I'll tell you what the mob rule was. 40 people were there, 150 coppers were there. A mate of mine who's a retired headmaster had his nose broken by a copper. So who's doing mob rule here, mate? You've got to be careful about that.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call that mob rule. I mean, that you're talking an individual event, but
No. He was one of many that were beaten up by the police.
But again, in the larger sphere, what you're advocating is essentially mob rule. It's just saying
No. That's really disingenuous. This has nothing to do with the mobs. It is a platform for people who feel completely let down by the system to talk about it. You know, democracy. Our first initial statement in 2011 ended with, "This is where change happens. Come and take part." We are a platform for people who have realised the truth, which is that the whole government, each government you're going to vote in, they're working for corporations. That whole revolving door is really serious. Okay, how does anyone run? If you're going to run, particularly in the States, okay, at the moment, well, everyone who runs, they've got huge corporations funding them. That's why we still have people who think that, you know, climate change isn't caused by human
Charlie,
beings.
if part of your concern, based on everybody knows this, the left and right of the agenda that you're on, that you fear that these guys and women may succeed, is that where your fear comes from?
Well, I'll put it this way. If you look through history, with the exception of the American Revolution, there's been no revolution that's ever been successful.
How do suffragettes get the vote?
Revolutions, if you look at the French Revolution, for instance, revolutions generally don't work.
Suffragettes got the vote, didn't they?
Yeah, they got.
And you don't want to stand for anything, so that's almost an irrelevance.
What I'm standing for is systemic change.
That wasn't changing an entire. You know, to me, what you sound like you're advocating is the change of the whole system. Getting the vote was changing a part of the system, and I think a positive change, but it wasn't.
You think it's a positive change? God, obviously it was.
Yeah, of course it is. You know, but again, I just know from history revolutions don't work.
Yeah, but Tim Berners-Lee's come along, and this is the first time we have an opportunity for a global revolution. And that's because we are wired globally, and there is a huge. It's growing exponentially. Yeah. And it's a really considerable movement. And this movement, what it's doing is actually for the first time linking up and joining the dots globally about the fact that, look, it's not the problems that's happening in my country, it's actually the way that this crazy capitalist system, the way it's being developed, your free market thing, is just a murderous system. People are joining up the dots and saying, what's happening in Peru, what's happening in Greece, what's happening in Toxteth, whatever. They're all part of the same endemic problem. We have to have systemic change. Occupy, the key phrase that we kept going on about was, we are here to deal with the disease, not the symptoms of the disease anymore. And the disease itself is an economic system that's broken, unsustainable, undemocratic and unjust.
Well, no, actually, it's not. And again, I'm glad I know you watched the video I put up the other day from Deirdre McCluskey.
And people should watch that, because it's a shocking video, folks.
But if you look at it, you know, we had no wealth up until, I think the average person was on about $3 a day, up until about 1880. And what changed it was when there was a respect for the entrepreneurial class, and you had the Industrial Revolution. In innovation, I don't want to see things that stifle innovation. And, you know, that's what corporations are able to do, whether you're talking, you know, McDonald's finding a better way to deliver the hamburger, or Henry Ford developing a different way to deliver transportation. He didn't invent the car, but he invented a better way to produce it to make it cheaper to everybody. Ray Kroc didn't invent the hamburger. He just invented a better way of delivering it on a mass scale, etc. You know, to me, that's the free market at work, and it has enriched us as a society. We're far richer. Even the poorest of our society here in the United Kingdom is far richer than they would have been, thanks to the capitalist, the free market system.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary argument to say, hey, everything's all right because, you know, these days people are slightly better off. But no, the disparity, the inequality is just embarrassing. Okay, it's time that our species grew up. It's about. I'm sorry, you can't possibly sit there and say, yeah, we're doing pretty well, when you realise that high net worth earners, okay, are living in this kind of gaga planet where they've got trillions. While we're in a country, one of the fifth richest countries,
they're also
and we have a million people
paying
on
more
food
tax than
tax.
everybody else.
But wait a minute, why?
put together.
Also, why?
I don't think they pay enough tax. And hold on, you've got to be careful about tax avoidance systems, tax evasion systems. I mean, famously, you've got the super rich. They can afford the super accountants. So in fact, there was that famous story, wasn't there, about Donald Trump paying less tax than his secretary.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Can't
You can
defend
come back,
that.
Charlie. Otherwise, it will be as if people don't realise I'm here and I won't get paid. I just want to ask you one thing, and this is a question that I think many people fear. However laudable your aims may be, and however much we may all benefit or we may not, because that is obviously open to debate, the problem will be threefold. Number one, how do you make a change that is peaceful? Number two, how do you decide how you break up the spoils? So the person who's living in a luxury home in St John's Wood and the person who's living in a two-bed flat in Deptford, who has the right to those, and how do you decide how any wealth is going to be split up? And thirdly and finally, you have to guarantee to people that after Occupy, we are better off. Whether you understand about the whole workings of the economy, we know about the importance of wealth creation, because as much as the wealthiest create and possibly benefit more, we all benefit, and we don't want that to go. So that is the fear from many people.
Okay, cool. So a simple answer to that would be, for those people who are listening, it's better to go through this life having tried to make a better world than to actually gone, no, we can't do anything about it.
But wait a minute, that's what the entrepreneurs and capitalists are doing.
That's not a cop-out, because the fact is, a lot of people who are listening to this are going, it is absolutely right. You cannot possibly continue with a system where people are evading, that revolving door, corporations controlling governments.
But
you can't go on like
but
this.
You go into
so
power
what would be
and
better?
you change it, because you've already got the structure. You have a perfect structure for what you want, because you have a legislation system, you have a court system, you have policing by consent. You have a lot of stability that you could walk in and say, right, I like what we have, but I'm going to change this for companies, I'm going to change this for law, I'm going to change this for housing.
It is happening. It is happening. You've got in Spain, for example, the Podemos party, okay? And in Greece, the name, I can't pronounce the name, Syriza, I think is the group in Spain. Parties are now beginning to form that do represent these views. We haven't got that in this country yet, but we'll get there. And, while to push towards that, to create a kind of critical mass, you need movements like Occupy. You need magazines like New Internationalists as well. You need to have sources of information that are kind of credible source of information that are talking about this in a useful way.
But again, I don't think you're necessarily defining the problem. Some of the things you talk about, for instance, this argument about inequality, I don't see as a problem. I don't. Listen, Rupert Murdoch has far much money than I do. It doesn't affect my life. What affects my life is where I am from ground zero. All right. I want to see that people are in a thriving economy where they can have jobs, good paying jobs, that lift them up. But the only way you're going to get me or you on the same par as Bill Gates or Rupert Murdoch isn't to necessarily lift us up, but to tear them down is the only way it's going to work. And I don't want to see that happen. These were the guys that were entrepreneurs, that were geniuses at what they did, that worked hard, and they've created wealth. So the fact that, for instance, Bill Gates is worth, $40 billion, well, you have to ask, how much did he create in total to have that 40? How much did he add to the planet? And there's probably 5 or 6 times that amount when you look at the fact that nowadays I'm carrying here on my phone more computing power than the Apollo mission had to go to the moon. And that's because these guys,
I wouldn't be able to do what it does, presumably, without
iPads that are all getting stolen, as I remember in New York. So innovation comes through an entrepreneurial class, and I want them to thrive. And again, I want them to be rewarded for their work, because lifting them up also lifts me up.
So it creates jobs. If you've got a kind of big corporation, of course that creates jobs. But also you have a situation whereby there is this incredible disparity between high net worth owners and very, very poor.
But it doesn't necessarily matter.
What matters, Charlie, is the fact that corporations, this also links into what you're saying about, Occupy should have their own party and stuff like that. Currently you have a situation whereby corporations are able to use this, lobbying, to have people come from their companies to actually write their own energy legislation. So you've got people coming from energy companies going into government, seconded to government to kind of twist the legislations around energy to suit the company they work for. You've got such a bent system at the moment, and we have to address those things first, all right? Your argument about, Bill Gates creating lots of jobs for loads of people, that's of course.
And not just that.
That's the current system, people who run businesses create jobs for people.
Not just the jobs, the fact that he's placed a computer in my hands that I would have never had.
The innovation, the argument, I understand, of course, but what happens at the moment, and anyone knows about this, is when you've got great innovation, great scientists, great thinkers, that corporations are going to get that guy or get that woman, and in fact they're going to actually be able to kind of look at it as a source of making huge amounts of money instead of, look at Tim Berners-Lee. He's one of my heroes. He did something that would have made him trillions, and famously, in the opening ceremony of the Olympics, he said, "This is for everyone." He could have made trillions, and I'll tell you, if he sold it to a corporation or a government, we would have lost one of the greatest tools that this planet's got because of us, it's control.
I think that, and I think
where are all the Tim Berners-Lees these days?
Again, I think they're running corporations. They're the ones that are looking for the bettermost or for whatever. And
look, someone who's good at making money has a very specific skill, and for some reason that's highly rewarded. Where I was a teacher for a long time. Well, that's a hell of a skill. But I mean, we're in this really twisted bit of our history whereby, if you go to the city of London,
it's supply and demand. What you do, as important as it is as a teacher, is not the same as distributing money, which is a limited resource that is used to enrich companies and to make the world a better place. It's just
corporations are not making the world a better place.
Of course they are.
Of course they're not, for goodness sake. So you think the fossil fuel industry at the moment is making the world a better place?
We have the TV sets, the flat screens we have. These were all done by corporations. As again, I was going to say, Adam Smith talked about the butcher wasn't doing it for the joy of cutting meat. He was doing it for the utility of making money. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a reward for effort.
Innovation is owned by corporations at the moment, so it's seen as a source of making money for their shareholders.
Yeah.
The reason I bring up the example of Tim Berners-Lee is, where are all those other geniuses who are going, no, I'm not going to kind of sell this. This is for everyone. So in other words,
if they want to do that, they can. But again, the ones that are funding this are the corporations that are spending billions every year, much of which goes into duff projects that don't work. It's the same with the recording industry. You think of how many bands you have to go through to get a Madonna. Or a George Michael.
And we only know the Microsofts that work. Look, I'm going to have to bring it to a close very, very shortly, and I want to just give listeners a chance if they want to react. Great. Obviously, it's too late this hour. Well, no, too late because you've done so well. You've said it all, I think. But 0207 224 2000 on that. And if you have just joined us, the voices you've heard have not been mine, but Jamie Kelsey Fry and Charlie Wolf, who are here to review the day. Just Charlie, I'm aware we haven't done any of your other stories, and we're not going to have time to do any of your other stories.
I'm also aware tomorrow. Then
I'm also aware that Jamie Kelsey Fry has done a wonderful plug for New Internationalist magazine on more than one occasion. Yes. So, Charlie, I'm going to leave the last couple of words to you.
I don't have a magazine.
You don't need one.
No, but you can follow me on Twitter. It's Charlie C. Wolf. Charlie SEAWOLF. Twitter, of course, was done by a corporation and funded and gave a lot of people jobs and has given the world a way of communicating.
There's a lot of arguments against what you're saying there. My Twitter tag is at Jamie Kelsey Fry. And New Internationalist is at New Int. And I had a good time.
Actually, I'll give a plug. There's a great set of videos that talk about economics. It's called Learn Liberty. If you go over to YouTube and look up a place called Learn Liberty, you'll see, and I'll try and tweet a couple. There's the one we were talking about.
I know, please do go, and I know a lot of people who look at those videos and be absolutely horrified with what they're saying, so I recommend people go and look at it for some entertainment.
I'd like to give one recommendation, and that is, if you're thinking of hosting a dinner party, you could do no worse than inviting the two of our guests tonight, Jamie Kelsey Fry and Charlie Wolf, but just make sure they're sat at very, very far ends of the table. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. It's been a wonderful hour. I feel like I've been eavesdropping on a very lively debate in the pub, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. I'm sure you have. 0207 224 2000 is our number on everything that we discussed, particularly, of course, the last bit, which actually all started I don't think we ever found out why, if you're under 30, that is it, but presumably you focused on that one bit. But it's too late. You'll have to find the story.
There was a story.
There was there somewhere. It is just coming up to a minute to midnight. Valley Fontaine has the headlines on the way, and the other side of that, for another couple of hours till James Max turns up, we'll take your calls at 0207 224 2000. Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9. Lots of matters on our agenda tonight. Myleene Klaus versus Ed Miliband. We're also talking about Paddington Bear getting a PG certificate. The mood entirely different. Morning to you, Dave.
Hello, Tom. First of
Welcome.
all, I would like to say something. Jamie Kelsey Fry, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, one of our two guests
I
this
don't
morning.
like politics or anything like that, but the guy is so honest and so interesting.
Out of interest, because politics affects us all, and because we all have